tonight on CBC Vancouver News. BC's first Indigenous-owned LNG facility receives approval.
It will provide unprecedented economic opportunity for both Haisla Nation and for the region.
The anticipation in Kitimat and the criticism also. The 2026 FIFA World Cup gets even more supersized.
We're thrilled. For us, more matches is a good thing.
What the tournament's expansion means for Vancouver and assessing BC's avalanche forecast for the spring.
You don't want to be up here in your running shoes and shorts.
Warnings warm temperatures and longer days can bring fresh danger.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Michelle Ghoussoub. Anita is away tonight. BC has granted environmental approval to a multi-billion-dollar energy project. Once completed, Cedar LNG would be Canada's largest First Nations-owned infrastructure project. But as Renee Filipponi explains, today's milestone comes with concern for the province's climate targets.
An emotional moment for the Haisla Nation Chief Councillor.
It is an understatement when I say this is a very proud day for me as Chief Councillor of the Haisla Nation, and a very personal one.
As the BC government approved the first Indigenous-owned liquefied natural gas export facility in Canada.
The choice between protecting the environment and creating good jobs is a false one. We see a better way.
The Cedar LNG facility will float in the water off Kitimat. It's expected to produce 3 million tons of liquefied natural gas a year to export to Asian markets. It will be much smaller than the LNG Canada facility also being built in Kitimat. Both will get gas via the controversial Coastal GasLink pipeline. Indigenous leaders who oppose that plan because of environmental concerns also take issue with the provincial approval of this project.
We resist because we know we're doing the right thing for everybody. They're only looking at the dollar value and not the long-term human cost here.
It's not thrilling that it's a fossil fuel-related project, but at least it's natural gas.
This energy expert says there is a market for natural gas and government should be focused on reducing demand.
The point is that you have to reduce the demand for natural gas rather than reduce the supply. And we're getting some progress on that globally.
Even as the province approved the new project, it tightened emission rules that will make it more difficult to approve LNG plants in the future.
Signaling that it doesn't see much by way of future for more LNG expansion in the province.
And there are hurdles ahead for Cedar LNG. Not only does it need final approval from Ottawa, but investors will want to ensure the project is still worth it. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Vancouver.
Meanwhile, local members of the Wet'suwet'en living near Houston say they've been subject to intimidation and harassment from the RCMP. The First Nation lives along the route of the Coastal GasLink pipeline, an area which has seen blockades, protests, and arrests in recent years. Radio-Canada video producer Camille Vernet went to the area to find out more.
Hello, welcome.
Gayleen Morris grew up on this land. 4 days a week, she stays here with her daughter.
We live out here. We have a fully functioning kitchen. We have cabins. We have solar power.
But this is not an ordinary cabin. Located down a forestry road, it's near the construction site of the Coastal GasLink pipeline on Wet'suwet'en territory. She and others who live here oppose the pipeline.
It's like going into a war zone. And it's a war that it's an invisible war that it seems that people in society and in everyday life out here don't realize what we're going through up there. And, you know, it's like having police and having security surveil you 24/7 outside your door. And all you're doing is living with your children.
She says SURG, a division of the RCMP, has been targeting land defenders like herself. The division is tasked to respond to protests on resource projects in the province.
We've had intimidation on the roads for dirty license plates, harassment.
After facing hundreds of public complaints, SURG is currently under investigation by the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission.
As you can see behind me, there's a high fence.
I believe this is maybe the third or fourth of its kind. All the previous fences have been destroyed by RCMP conducting a so-called wellness check.
After an alleged attack on a pipeline work site in February last year, security and SERG started to increase their patrols.
It went as far as being 8 times within a 12-hour period. So it would be 4 visits in a day and 4 visits in the night, in the middle of the night. And it really put a lot of us on edge.
The land defenders recorded the interventions.
Do you have a search warrant?
CBC reached out to RCMP and they confirmed that patrols increased after the February attack and that so far no charges have been laid. RCMP says patrols ensured public safety, but they were not considered a wellness check. Hereditary Chief Namox says they had nothing to do with the February attack and that surveillance is meant to scare his people.
Somehow they want us to pretend that this is normal for us. It's not normal to have security and SERG, RCMP monitoring your every move on your territory. You do lose that sense of freedom.
Gayleen Maurice says she won't stop coming to this place.
When you know that, this is your home and you're not doing anything wrong, it doesn't change anything. You just continue to live your everyday life and do the best you can, with the changes that are happening around you. But with us, we anchor into the land and that's where we find our stability.
She hopes one day her children will be able to move freely on the territory. Camille Vernet, Radio-Canada, Houston.
BC's tuition waiver for those who are in foster care will no longer have an age limit. The program had only been limited to those aged 19 to 26 attending post-secondary education, but that will no longer be the case starting in August. The waiver covers as much as $3,500 in tuition costs. The government says they'll fund the extension with more than $19 million, and it's expected to support another 1,200 students.
Thank you so much for that love letter, that institutional love letter that helps us commit to the success of all former youth in care here in British Columbia.
To be eligible, students must be a full-time or part-time undergraduate student at a public post-secondary institution, a Native education college, or one of 10 approved trades training providers. The future of a Vancouver Island railway line remains murky. The historic E&E rail line, which extends from Victoria up to Courtenay and west to Port Alberni, has been dormant for a decade. Today, the government revealed its intent for the corridor, but it doesn't make its future any clearer. Here to conduct us through the decisions around the line, municipal affairs reporter and self-professed train guy, Justin McElroy. Justin, what did the government announce today?
Yeah, Michelle, this announcement is complicated because it came from a court-ordered deadline for the provincial and federal government to say what their intent was for the entire line. Now, for those that have forgotten the issue or don't live on Vancouver Island, the ENN rail line, you can see right here, back in the 80s in Victoria. It's about 300 kilometers going from Victoria, if you take a look at this map, all the way to Courtenay. And since 2011, there hasn't been any rail service on it for passengers. Since 2014, any freight service. Now, a First Nations north of Nanaimo, the Snow-Now-West people, filed legal action saying that because the line had been dormant for so long, the land should return to them. Court of Appeal said that a decision had to be made on what to do with the land by tomorrow. Well, today, the federal and provincial governments announced two things. Number one, that 10 acres of land that is on Snow-Now-West territory would go back to the First Nation. But number two, that $18 million would be put forward for another round of consultation to try and find some way for the corridor as a whole to be used in the future. But of course, that consultation hasn't begun yet, and there's no guarantee on what might happen there.
So, Justin, does this tip the balance one way or the other for the future of the line?
Well, it's tough to say. On one hand, there are several different First Nations that have different claims to the line, that have different ideas of what they might want to do with it, either having it completely restored or saying that they would want to use it for their own purposes. But we brought that question to Premier David Eby today, and he said he was confident in some sort of positive resolution.
This is not the end of the line for the corridor. This is just the beginning of the work in a different way, in the way that all of our projects and land use decisions need to work in this province in partnership with First Nations.
But of course, people have heard a lot of promises, a lot of consultations, a lot of studies over the last decade for this rail line. Nothing has come to fruition yet. We'll see if this round brings any difference.
Okay, Justin McElroy reporting live for us tonight on the Train Beat. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Michelle.
The BC government is promising to take more steps to prevent violent crime. They announced they'll be creating special units to deal with repeat violent offenders.
With the Repeat Violent Offending Intervention Initiative, we're standing up coordinated response teams of police, dedicated prosecutors, and probation officers. They will consult and monitor cases continuously throughout the justice system arc, from investigation and charge assessment through bail, trial, or plea sentencing, to enhanced release planning that includes mental health services and ongoing community supervision.
Alongside the units, Farnworth says he's optimistic that federal changes to the bail system will also add restrictions to violent offenders. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was in BC today, and he's making big promises to tackle the opioid crisis. Speaking in New Westminster, he announced plans to hold Big Pharma accountable if he wins the next election.
I will launch a massive series of lawsuits amounting to over $40 billion in claims. We will join British Columbia's lawsuit in order to recover the federal health costs that have resulted from Big Pharma's dirty and disgusting actions against our communities. We will launch a separate federal lawsuit to recover money that the federal government has had to spend on borders, Indigenous programs, policing, treatment, and other costs associated with this crisis.
Poilievre says his proposed lawsuit is inspired by 32,000 opioid-related deaths and just as many opioid-related hospitalizations since 2016. And as you heard, they're also saying he would join a BC-led lawsuit against drug manufacturers and consultants. The 2026 FIFA World Cup is set to be the biggest tournament the organization has ever hosted. FIFA announcing today it's expanding the World Cup by adding another 24 matches. The North American World Cup is being hosted by 16 different cities. As Joel Ballard explains, Vancouver could potentially be home to more matches.
The World Cup is coming to Vancouver. And on Tuesday, FIFA added another 24 matches to the tournament. Ahead of the expansion, Canada was promised 10.
We feel there'd probably be a fair split with our friends in Toronto, so that's what we're looking for. You know, anything above that will be a bonus for us, and we'll be thrilled to have it.
But first, there's still lots of work to be done, like replacing the artificial turf with a grass field, a FIFA safety requirement.
We know that we'll need to put a watering system in, a lighting system in, and then bring in the real grass. But right now, FIFA is working through exactly how do they make that happen. How do they make that happen consistently across 16 stadiums in different climates in 3 different countries.
Along with that, he says security for such a large event will take a lot of planning. And of course, there's the hotel shortage. Last week, Destination Vancouver released a report that found 20,000 hotel rooms are needed in Metro Vancouver by 2050 to keep up with demand, 10,000 in Vancouver alone. And that's an ongoing concern for City Council.
That's just tens of thousands of jobs and millions in lost economic impact if we don't deliver on that. It's super important for sport hosting, and it's incredibly important for our tourism sector here in Vancouver.
Still, FIFA is expected to be a tourism boon for the region, and not just during the 6-week tournament.
We know that it will expose Vancouver in global markets in different ways that we've had the opportunity before to try to drive business conferences or leisure travel, or put Vancouver on display for other reasons besides sports.
That excitement shared by the team at BC Place.
We talk about bringing people to this beautiful province, introducing them here, and knowing that Vancouver's that gateway to getting people in here and then seeing all of BC. I don't think there's a better place to start.
Cross in towards Alphonso Davies!
May expects the full FIFA schedule and details of who is hosting what to be released later this year. Joel Ballard, CBC News, Vancouver.
Passengers of an Air India flight traveling from Vancouver to New Delhi had a rough travel day yesterday. Air India Flight 186 was scheduled to take off yesterday morning, but passengers weren't able to board the plane until 12 hours later due to multiple delays. And once boarded, passengers sat on the tarmac for an hour before the flight was canceled due to technical reasons. Affected passengers are being moved to the earliest alternate flight, which for some is 2 days from now. Staying on air travel now, the return to flying for Canadians has been marred by frequent flight disruptions and unhappy passengers. As we just heard, some critics say not enough is being done to keep airlines in check. But as Sophia Harris reports, Ottawa has announced a plan today to try to smooth out some of the turbulent travel woes.
Mohammed Jazayiri and his wife enjoyed most of their vacation in Mexico.
This is on a sunset on the beach.
Until Sunwing canceled their flight back to Vancouver. After waiting nearly a week for another flight, Jazayiri gave up and bought tickets home on a different airline.
It was a nightmare. The support that we got from Sunwing was nothing.
Sunwing, which will soon be taken over by WestJet, hasn't reimbursed Jazayiri for the return flight. So he filed a complaint with the Canadian Transportation Agency. But due to mass flight disruptions both in the summer and in December, the CTA has a backlog of more than 40,000 complaints. Jazayiri was told it could take more than 18 months to review his case.
Justice delayed is justice denied. This whole system's on life support right now. It's not functioning the way it was supposed to.
The backlog is huge.
The federal government is now promising nearly $76 million over 3 years to address the problem.
This will, in real term, mean 200 additional employees who will focus exclusively on complaints. That will take a massive dent out of the backlog.
Ottawa gave the CTA $11 million last year for the same reason. But the backlog only grew. The opposition says Prime Minister Justin Trudeau needs to do more.
He should allow for the complaints that are made against the airlines and the airports to be heard more quickly, and the penalties to be meted out to against those airlines quicker.
The CTA recently doled out fines to several major airlines, the highest to Sunwing for $126,000 for failing to update passengers about flight delays in December. Some experts say the fines need to soar higher.
We have yet to see the regulator really bring out a big stick on anything, I would say, and that's very disappointing.
To help keep airlines in check, Ottawa says it will introduce tougher air passenger protection regulations in the spring. Sophia Harris, CBC News, Vancouver.
The new funding is expected to tackle the growing backlog of passenger complaints and reduce travel chaos, but the overall effect of air travel on the environment will remain an ongoing issue. This expert says frequent air travel needs to stop to address that problem.
I think we're into a future where frequent flying as a form of mass transportation is probably not going to be a long-term solution. I think we will keep flying where we have to, but the idea of jetting off to Vegas for the weekend or going golfing in Arizona or Florida and coming back in 2 days, that's really not going to be very sustainable.
As BC grapples with one of its most dangerous avalanche seasons in years, forecasters are warning of more hazardous conditions coming in the spring. Warmer temperatures can often bring an unstable snowpack. Our John Hernandez reports on why the risks are far from over.
Spring might be on the horizon, but longer days and some extra snow means there's still plenty of life on these icy peaks.
You don't want to be up here in your running shoes and shorts.
On Tuesday morning, a dusting of snow atop the North Shore Mountains, and even more in the sea to sky and southern interior, where about 25 centimeters dropped overnight, adding to the considerable avalanche risk.
Typically, when a lot of new snow falls, it takes several hours or even days to settle and gain strength. So we quite often see that fresh snow falling down slope easily.
With 12 avalanche deaths this season in BC, forecasters say dangers will remain over the next 2 months. The snowpack is deep, but longer days and warmer temperatures can make them particularly unstable.
It just becomes a more complex time to understand what's going on in the mountains, and it's just important to respect that and be a little more conservative.
Ski resorts say with spring break in session, there's an increase in visitors at this time of year. They're urging riders not to venture beyond boundaries.
Very, very clear is whether you're looking at trail maps or whether you're looking at the actual site, the boundaries, and it's the recommendation is staying in those boundaries unless you're prepared, educated, and so forth.
The coming months also mark a busy time for search and rescue crews who advise backcountry users not to get complacent because of extra sunlight hours and to make sure to bring the essentials.
Your headlamp, extra clothing, food, water, things like that. Know your fitness level, how far you're going to go, research your route.
The deadly winter season's days might be numbered, but dangers still lurk in its icy aftermath. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
Riley Lachuk joins us now for the forecast. Riley, thanks for being with us. Today, pretty much a continuation of this mostly dry stretch we've had lately.
Well, thanks, Michelle. Turned out to be not a terrible day across much of the province. Today, we got up to 10 degrees at YVR this afternoon, sitting at about 9 right now. A little bit cooler on the island and a little bit cooler out to the eastern part of the province, where we did see some lingering flurries through the earlier part of today. Still seeing some snow in northern parts of British Columbia, though, but we are entering a more stable, a more dry pattern as we head into the day on Wednesday. You can see we do still have some lingering showers along the south coast. Metro Vancouver seeing a few droplets here and there through the afternoon today, but we are going to see much sunnier skies to round out the week, but we do have some more snow in the forecast. I'll time that out coming up.
Thanks, Riley. After initially canceling the Vancouver Folk Music Festival for the year, organizers say it's back on. They say it's thanks to a number of investors who stepped up when the news first broke in January. Organizers say financial challenges brought on by the pandemic were initially part of shutting down this year's event, as well as mounting production costs. Last month, the province also announced the creation of a $30 million fund to provide one-time grants of up to $250,000, all for fairs, festivals, and other qualifying events. Organizers say the fund was a game changer, and the event will go ahead July 14th to 16th. A judge has ruled that a Prince George club that was repeatedly ticketed for flouting COVID-19 rules does not have the right to a trial in French. Last year, Learn to Earn Bartending School and Consulting applied for a French language trial. An accused person in Canada is entitled to a trial in either English or French if they can direct counsel in that language. But the owner of the club is monolingual English speaker. The court ruled there was no evidence they did any business in French. The lawyer representing the company says the trial has drawn intense interest across the country.
You had people fly in from Ontario all the way to Prince George to hear this case. You have supporters it is a public interest case. You have supporters from the Acadian community right in Prince George.
The lawyer says she will be inviting government leaders from across Canada and Francophone diplomats to observe the proceedings. And she says they're not asking for a French-only trial, but rather a bilingual one. After the break, a conversation with MLA Ellis Ross about BC's Indigenous-owned LNG plant and its recent endorsement by the province. And 2 people dead and 9 other injured after a pickup truck hit pedestrians outside Montreal. More on the man behind the crash and his arrest after the break. Thanks for watching our commercial-free live stream. The owner of a PEI horse sanctuary is determined to keep her operation going, but it's a lot of work, especially since her husband, who was very involved, passed away. She hopes to make a way to make it a bit easier to care for the dozens of animals in her care. Laura Meter has more.
This is Duchess. She's a little Welsh pony.
Diane Ferg knows each horse here and the story of how they were saved. She and her grandniece look after more than 70 horses, ponies, and donkeys at the Wild Rose Sanctuary. She says all of them were going to be slaughtered before they came here.
We intervened and saved every one of them, and we're doing our best to give them a forever home where they can live out their life in peace.
We feed them and water them like our normal schedule, and we just mostly hang out with them. It's really fun to do. She's so sweet and she's so friendly.
It's gotten harder to run this place since Diane's husband, Gerhard Ferg, passed away a couple of years ago.
It's a struggle, but we just take it day by day is all we do.
Supporters are now trying to help the sanctuary. Some are donating time, others are fundraising.
I hope she can get enough monthly sponsorships or horse sponsorships or donations that she can relax a little bit and maybe work on some of the projects that the farm really needs. She's taking care of vet costs. She's monitoring every one of the animals to make sure they're healthy and happy. She has to do barn work. She does field work. It's just, there's so much she needs to do that it's almost hard to describe.
We need more help. Yes, that's the bottom line. We need the help. It's a lot. I realize it's a lot for two of us.
She says with the loss of her husband, she's learned to do more, but she's grateful for the community help. She's determined to keep the sanctuary open for these animals.
I've always loved them. I've always had them in my life, and I'll continue to have them in my life. It's my passion. It comes from the heart.
She has decided not to take any more horses and just focus on looking after the ones here now. Laura Meter, CBC News, Forest Hill.
Turning back to our top story now. Today, the BC government endorsed a liquefied natural gas plant in Kitimat, and it will be the only Indigenous-owned LNG export facility in the world. We're bringing in BC Liberal MLA Ellis Ross, who's been spearheading this project. Ellis, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Ellis, this has been a long time coming for you. What did it take to have this LNG facility approved?
It took over a decade of work in terms of the LNG industry overall. It took a lot of consultations with my band members. It took a lot of work inside the environmental assessment process for Canada and BC. It took a lot of lobbying, the provincial government, the federal government. It took a lot of work with other First Nations. It took up 13 years of my life, actually.
And this project is coming as BC is currently not on track to meet its climate targets. So how will adding more LNG at this time help the province meet those targets, even with the environmental protections that we did see announced today?
That's a great question, because I saw the same press release come out back in 2018, and they didn't make their climate action targets in. So the government actually knows something that I don't in terms of how they're going to achieve that. In fact, if anything, I've got questions around their clean energy office in terms of, is that just a rehash of the standing offer program for clean energy projects that the government actually kiboshed there a couple of years ago? So a lot of unanswered questions, but to be clear, projects like LNG Canada Phase 2 and LNG Cedar LNG, they're not out of the woods. The real hard work is going to start now.
Okay, and you worked closely with the Haisla Nation on this. What does it mean to have Indigenous ownership of this project?
It meant the same thing as when we first started talking about it back in 2004. In terms of forestry, in terms of mining, in terms of LNG, it meant the same thing back then as it does now, because many First Nations across Canada want an alternative to the Indian Act. They don't want to be dependent on a paternalistic funding agreement between BC or Canada. And so anything that a First Nation can do to bring in their own revenues means they can actually move further away from the Indian Act and actually have the ability to develop our own programs to help our own people while making BC stronger.
Okay, well, just the start. We'll be covering this much more in the future. Thank you, BC Liberal MLA Ellis Ross, joining us on the show tonight. Ellis, thank you so much.
Thank you.
One of the planet's biggest tech companies announced more job cuts today. Why Facebook's parent company plans to lay off thousands. That's next.
This may look like a typical after-school scene, but these are not real students. This is fantasy, hoping to drive home a hard dose of reality in the attack against teenage drinking and driving. It's the last day of a grueling shooting schedule for the mini-musical epic Knocking on Heaven's Door, a $300,000 project funded entirely by donations.
It was a long process. It wasn't easy, but we were really happy with like ICBC and BC Hydro, BC Transit, Van City Savings Credit Union came in with some funding too. The Vancouver Police Department donated police cars, and the RCMP donated their helicopter. The ambulance came in. It was a very community-oriented project.
The video will follow two teenage couples played by these four local actors through grad day, and as is all too common in scenes played out every June in high schools across the country, the night ends in tragedy.
Just hope that they see the tragedy of the show, and really, I hope that it hits home.
Canadian duo Love and Sass say it's a project they want to lend more than their voices to.
Neither one of us drink alcohol ourselves. For example, when we like to go out, to clubs and have a good time, but we drink like cranberry juice or orange juice or something like that. And so we want kids to know that you're putting your life in jeopardy when you drink, and especially when you drink and drive.
Two versions of the video will be cut, one 4-minute piece to compete in the fast-paced world of music videos, and a 20-minute instructional package for school distribution. Either way, co-producer Jane Charles says the message is bound to hit home.
Most of the people working on the show and people involved have lost someone to drinking and driving before, so it's really close to heart for a lot of us.
Anna Saraldi, CBC News, Vancouver.
A religious order of the Catholic Church has released the names of more than 24 priests who have been accused of sexually abusing children over the last 60 years. The Jesuits of Canada say only 3 of those listed are still alive. And as we hear from Marina von Stackelberg, there are still many unanswered questions. But before we begin, we want to warn viewers that details in this story are distressing.
The Jesuits of Canada has named 27 priests and brothers it says are credibly accused of sexually abusing children. CBC News has not independently verified the allegations. On the list is George Epoch, believed to have sexually abused more than 100 children, including Bob Lemieux.
What Epoch did to me has ruined much of my life.
Epoch died in the 1980s. Only 3 of the priests named as abusers on the list are still alive. The audit looked at cases dating back 60 years.
How many other Jesuits are in the category of allegations that somebody decided weren't credible?
In a letter addressed to parishioners, Canadian Jesuit leader Eric Oland says the Catholic Church has been slow to respond to abuse cases. He writes, moving through phases of outright denial, victim blaming, and moral incompetence, the Church has begun to respond justly.
Mothers sent these children to the priest for protection, not knowing the priest was abusing them. It was a heartbreak.
Some of those priests worked in residential schools and at churches on First Nations.
Having this information out there and publicly available helps to build up that truth around the residential school system and its legacies. And what it does now is it sets a precedent for other religious orders.
Survivors say the Church needs to do more.
These crimes happened in a systemic way. They allowed men to be present at the most vulnerable times in people's lives, and children were harmed.
The Jesuits have paid more than $7.5 million in settlements to victims of abuse. They acknowledge some priests were never charged or convicted. They say the list can always be added to if new allegations surface. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
As debate over a public inquiry continues, some members of Canada's Chinese diaspora are speaking out. Lisa Zing spoke to activists who say they've warned Ottawa about interference from Beijing for decades, and now they're worried about a possible racist backlash.
After almost 30 years of criticizing Beijing, Seng Xue says she's faced all kinds of harassment from the Chinese government.
My cell phone number all were published online to the advertisings, telling that I am offering sex service. We had the hunger strike in front of
Despite several attempts, the journalist says Canadian authorities largely ignored her warnings Beijing was harassing her.
I kept silence for a long time.
With Ottawa announcing it's investigating claims China meddled in Canada's last 2 elections.
One country, 2 systems is a brave experiment.
Some vindication for those who say their warnings have largely gone unheeded until now.
Well, better late than never.
China accuses some people in Canada of spreading lies that it's interfering in Canadian politics, while the PM defends one of his own MPs accused of being involved. Allegations Justin Trudeau has suggested have racial undertones. This activist warns against focusing on race in the search for what really happened.
I think the first thing we need to be very sure about is that racism is not being used as a shield to deflect from the real issue at hand.
He says that means calling a public inquiry and creating a foreign agent registry. But there's concern that done without care, that could lead to more attacks and accusations, especially as anti-Asian racism is on the rise, a result of the pandemic and worsening relations between Canada and China.
Members of the Chinese community are quite worried about people may somehow label them as medium or agents of the Chinese government.
As the investigations continue, there are calls for that work to involve consultations with the Chinese diaspora, those who are, after all, the targets of the interference. Lisa Xing, CBC News, Toronto.
Tragedy continues to ripple through the small town of Amqui in eastern Quebec. 11 people were run down by a pickup truck yesterday, and as Sarah Levitt reports, a local man is now facing 2 counts of dangerous driving causing death, and more charges are expected.
It was quite the scene outside of the Amqui courthouse this afternoon when Steve Gagnon arrived for his hearing. Lots of people from the town arrived hour before the hearing itself and waited for him to get out of the police car and get into the courthouse, and they had some choice words for him. This all stemming from what happened yesterday at 3 p.m. when witnesses say that Gagnon drove a pickup along the main stretch of road, jumped the curb and hit several pedestrians.
J'ai essayé de porter secours aux 2 personnes qui étaient couchées à terre.
This witness says he jumped out of the way of the pickup and then tried to help 2 men on the ground. He describes a chaotic scene and says he heard a child crying, trapped in a stroller, a woman underneath it. 2 people are dead, 7 others were brought to the hospital, 6 to a Quebec City trauma center. 3 of them are dealing with life-threatening injuries. 3 others, that include a baby and a toddler, are in stable condition. And it's left the people in this small town shaken.
We need to take care of the family of people who are dead now, people who are injuries right now. In Mi'kmaq, the word Amqui means where people are happy. Since yesterday is where people are crying.
All day long, people have been going to the local church to leave flowers and stuffed animals, a way for them to try to heal from this and try to move forward. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Amqui, Quebec.
The company behind Facebook is laying off 10,000 employees. That's on top of the 11,000 it cut last year. It's also scrapping plans to hire 5,000 new people, all of it part of a restructuring strategy for Meta. CEO Mark Zuckerberg says it's spurred by a changing global economy with higher interest rates and slow growth. It's a question straight out of Seinfeld. How much and how often do you tip post-pandemic? We'll have more on so-called tip creep after the break.
When I came into the house and there were a group of people sitting around on the living room floor eating spaghetti that my mother had fixed, and I asked a simple question, why were all these people on the living room floor? Someone responded that, oh, we're actors. and that statement turned me off from the arts. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I'm Clyde Ray, and they tell me I'm a change maker. I live here in St. John, New Brunswick. No, I didn't think that I would become an artist of any particular persuasion. I've always written. It was a love of mine that for whatever reasons was always there. Just to drop a name, my neighbor was Whoopi Goldberg. She lived over top of me, and her brother's name was Clyde also. Whoopi's mother and Clyde's mother's name was my mother's middle name, which was Emma. These group of people were very much involved in the arts, and we had the arts in my neighborhood. We had ballet. Now, if you can believe this, I used to take ballet classes when I was a kid. That's a thought to remember. I came to be an artist by having been in a VA hospital, getting treated for PTSD. I did, 6 years in the Army, I think. And I had written a little poem for my daughter. A social worker named Debbie Brennan read that poem and decided that that particular poem, or 2 of them, should be in the book of psychiatry. She said to me, you should keep doing that. And it was as if someone had opened the door for me and allowed me to walk through. And I decided after I had gotten out that, well, that's what I'm going to do. I don't know where it's going to take me, but that's what I've been doing ever since.
Well, tipping can feel a lot higher these days, and we're being asked to tip on things we've never had to before. We asked Ellen Morrow to put together a tipping survival guide.
Do you ever find yourself wondering, when did it get so hard just to figure out tipping? Where should you tip? How much? That's because more places than ever before are asking you to leave a tip. You know those prompts on card payment machines? It's happening at coffee shops, some stores, takeout spots.
The gas station, Subway, laundromat, everywhere.
Places you might never even have thought about tipping before. It's called tip creep.
These days, I'm like, do I have to give you a $2 tip just for takeout?
And there's also tipflation, where those numbers on those prompts are getting higher and higher. We're talking like 18, 20, 30%, putting it on you, the customer, to pick a number or say no, all in front of the person who's serving you.
Sometimes I just get like that look from the waiter, and it's a little intimidating.
It can all be uncomfortable, but do you really have to tip everywhere you go now? And with the cost of living so high, how do you navigate all this? So we could tip 15, 20, 30%. The advice from personal finance expert Barry Choi is pretty simple. Do you, but it kind of depends on where you are.
Normally I wouldn't tip at a coffee shop, but I do recognize that tip inflation is a thing. I'm going to go with the custom amount. We had 2 lattes. I think $1 is fair. So I just typed in $1 and we're going to just hit pay.
Do you feel guilty when you don't hit one of those amounts?
Not necessarily, because when you think about it, the dollar was still about 10 to 12%. So we're still tipping, it's just not at 15%.
Remember the old school tip jar on the counter that maybe you just ignored?
Thank you.
Barry says to think of digital tip prompts in places like coffee shops the same way, optional.
If you didn't pay a tip in the past for these services, don't be afraid to hit the 0 and okay. Figure out what number makes sense for you and for the type of service you're getting.
Does it make you a bad consumer if you don't tip at all when you go and get a coffee or you go to a bakery?
You know, I don't think it makes you a bad consumer if you're in a coffee shop or getting takeout, but some people will probably disagree with me.
But when it comes to table service, restaurant dining, where tip prompts are higher than ever, well, that's a lot less optional.
15%, I'm gonna say pre-tax, at least that's what my belief is. It really comes down to your budget.
Hi, Rubina, can you hear me? Rubina Ahmed Haq, another personal finance expert, says start thinking even higher.
Restaurants and bars, 18% may become the minimum, and then that will just be part of what people budget before they go out.
A lot of Canadians are already tipping higher than that. You know the tech company Square? You've probably seen their white card payment machines checking out of places before. Well, it says the average tip on its platform in Canada is now 20%. That's 4% higher than the 16% it was before the pandemic.
We became more generous, but that's now crept into some places where it can be annoying.
So tipping more and more often can be tough, especially with inflation. But you also need to think about minimum wage, because that's what most service workers are paid, and it's just not keeping up with the rising cost of living. Look at Ontario. The general minimum wage is $15.50, but a living wage, what someone would need to actually cover their basic expenses, would be $23.15 for a worker in the Greater Toronto Area. In British Columbia, the minimum wage is $15.65, but a living wage for a worker in Vancouver would be $24.08. And in Nova Scotia, the minimum wage is $13.60, but a living wage for someone in Halifax would be $23.50, almost $10 higher. Barista Vincent Garcia says tips are huge for workers like him.
People who work in the customer service industry are underpaid or paid minimum, so even getting some extra, a few bucks an hour as tips, it makes all the difference.
But is there a way around all of this? Some restaurants have totally done away with tipping, paying their employees a living wage instead of minimum and telling customers not to leave a tip. In a recent survey, 59% of Canadians say they prefer that model, even if it means higher menu prices. So we're here at Beast Pizza in Toronto that does just that.
Everyone in every position gets paid the same. We do factor that into the costs of what we offer, which doesn't really impact the menu that much.
And so what reaction do you see from customers when they come in and see no tipping on your menu?
I mean, no tipping, no one thinks that's a bad thing, Why should we expect people to pay other people's salary instead of a business? And also working in kitchens for a long time and seeing the inequality of tips with front of house, ethnicity, race, sex, age, all that stuff. I think it does lend itself to definitely more of a teamwork feeling.
Have you ever thought about the fact that maybe you could make more money if you were getting tips?
You're not going to have a night where you make $400 or $500. You're not going to have those crazy, amazing nights, but you're also never going to have a bad night. I'm very confident that levels out over time.
Just knowing with confidence that I can make my rent every month, that's huge for me.
But at most places, tipping is still the norm, and tip creep will just keep on creeping.
I don't know, which I should tip.
There's a minimum, there's a maximum. It's a lot of math involved.
Bottom line here, how do people survive tip creep, tip inflation?
Again, just look at your overall budget and think about where you're spending money. So if you're worried about the tips, maybe dining out, eating out, shopping less is part of your overall budget. If you're comfortable tipping 15%, you should definitely do that. That said, if you're going out to eat and you can't afford a tip, maybe you gotta rethink about what your goals are.
Riley Lachuk back with us for the long range. Riley, welcome back. What can we expect for the rest of the week?
Well, thanks, Michelle. We are going to see, as I mentioned earlier, much drier conditions, especially for the south coast as we head into the day on Wednesday. Here's a look at satellite radar right now. Still some cloud cover through the south shores right now. Some snow still falling into northern parts of the province. As we head into the day on Wednesday, we'll see most of this instability begin to move out of the south coast region, out of Metro Vancouver and the island, and we will see mainly cloudy skies to start the day. But we will see our skies clearing, especially in southern parts of the province as we head through the day. So expect a much sunnier day tomorrow and a much sunnier start to the day on Thursday as well through much of southern British Columbia. The north, a bit of a different story. We do have some snow moving, and this will begin to move into the province once again Thursday into Friday. Mounts out of the system still a little bit in flux at the moment, but we will see some accumulating snow still through northern British Columbia. This takes us out 48 hours. Along the coast, you can see that we will see some accumulating snow, especially around Bella Coola, Prince Rupert. As you head further east, accumulations a little bit less than we will see along the west coast. Rainfall still to come. Not a lot to talk about, really just trace amounts as we head through the night tonight as that system pushes out. Tonight's forecast, 3 degrees for Vancouver, 2 degrees in Victoria, a little bit cooler out into the mountain ranges and out toward the eastern part of the province. Terrace getting down to 0 tonight. Prince Rupert, 2 degrees. And we're expecting mainly cloudy skies, perhaps some flurries through northeastern parts of the province down to -19 in Fort Nelson. -7 tomorrow, 3 degrees in Williams Lake tomorrow afternoon. And nothing but bright sunshine on the south coast tomorrow. 9 degrees in Vancouver, Lytton, Kamloops, Osoyoos as well. So pretty nice day to get outside tomorrow. Here is a look at our extended forecast. As you can see, sunshine to start the weekend, then maybe some more instability as we get into the beginning of next week.
Thanks, Riley. A viral moment interrupted the Juno Awards last night when a topless protester charged the stage. How the audience reacted and what Edmonton police are saying after the break.
And you're just going to try to chase the line a little ahead.
Yeah.
Doing a pretty basic DIY sort of training course that we've been doing for years, and we're just going to make some small trays. The basic skill sets that we develop with that are the same skill sets you need for a whole range of types of construction-related activities or projects. For gender diverse individuals, for women, there is just a real sense that this industry is not inviting or desiring them and not a place that they're welcome. That's changing rapidly and it has to, because the housing crisis that we have needs all hands on deck to solve it. We've had members of all across the spectrum use this space, meet people, and what I love about it is it breaks down those areas of bigotry, it breaks down those assumptions about what it means to be a gender diverse or LGBTQIA plus individual, and you see that this is just a person who can also make cool things or do things, and then you work together on things, and all of those assumptions and all of those isolating factors that can exist break down. Turn it a little, perfect. Now you're back.
I feel quite good. It's my first time doing it, and I thought I did quite well. It's easy to learn, and it's not as scary as a lot of people think it is. Like, yes, big machines are confusing, but like some of them are just easy as like flipping on a button and then just wearing safety goggles and you tend to be set.
Perfect.
Peace.
Look at that little sliver.
I like the fact that we got to like use the power tools by ourselves. Though I was a little bit scared of some of them because they looked really sharp and a little bit scary, once you get to know how to use them decently well, it's really fun. I think I would like to build a bookshelves because I do like to write a lot. It's a great experience. They should definitely try it.
The real goal was just creating spaces for our young queer community to come out and really enjoy activities in their own kind of space with their own community. When one of my coworkers suggested woodworking, I got really excited because it's one of those skills, especially for some folks in the LGBTQ community. Maybe you haven't had the opportunity to learn. Maybe you haven't had the most comfortable space to be able to learn. And we're really just trying to provide that kind of environment for folks to really thrive and do their best and get a new skill. So to kind of come out on the other side and have all these young folks coming out and being themselves and thriving here is something that's, you know, both personally and professionally very, very rewarding.
There's lots of talk about the broadcast of last night's Juno Awards. Much of it concerns a very unmusical moment. It revolves around the protester who stormed the stage topless. Julia Wong now on the questions the incident is raising and the reaction.
Get the f*** off. Get the f*** off.
It was an unexpected moment. A topless protester wearing pasties interrupted Avril Lavigne as the pop star spoke on stage at the Junos. The words, "Stop logging old growth now" and "Save the Greenbelt" scrawled on the woman's body.
Like, I was worried that she could have done something, she could have pushed Avril, she could have hit her.
Shaila Ayasu was near the stage and surprised security did not act sooner.
It was just a weird scenario all around because, Again, it's all back to the security of why they didn't stop her from even getting on the stage in the first place.
The protester was on stage for about 30 seconds before security escorted her off. Edmonton police say a 37-year-old woman from Vancouver is charged with mischief.
That's definitely going down as one of the highlights.
It's a dash of controversy in a relatively tame awards show.
I think it stands out as definitely one that people are going to be talking about for a long time. And I think one that in a quiet way actually pays homage to the Juno's legacy of having spicier moments than maybe a lot of folks remember.
This professor says these kinds of protests are all about getting media attention, and they don't always work.
My sense is probably there's more paying attention to the spectacle part than the message part in this instance.
In a statement, Juno organizers said, "We take every step to avoid interruptions to our program, but there are always risks with live events and broadcasts." CBC News asked whether there will be an investigation into how the protester got on stage and whether any changes will be made to security. Organizers say they were not commenting further. Julia Wong, CBC News, Edmonton.
That is our show for this Tuesday. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. We just want to remind you, if you're not already watching us on CBC Gem, that is our free app. You can check it out. Zara Premji will have your late local news right here at 11. Good night.